Good evening, all you cats and jacks out there wandering the wasteland, taking up the Brahmin trails or listening to us in the dark of a quiet room. This is the place where we soothe the heartbroken, give succour to the world-weary, and embolden you to meet those things that go bump in the night, preferably with a plasma pistol in hand. I'm your host, Marisol de la Luna Negra. Some of you are just being introduced to me in Only Lonely Radio, where we play the finest selection of pre-war and post-war jazz, blues, tango, and funk. Sometimes I even give in to my inner guilty pleasures and play a little punk, hard rock, and reggae. What can I say? Like Walt Whitman, if I seem to contradict myself, it's because I have within me multitudes. It is multitudes I wish to talk with you today. The Lansing Republic is, in my humble opinion, the last bastion of the best of the pre-war world left over from the apocalypse. We can speak our minds, live our lives, and think whatever we like so long as we do not harm another gander. And that's about as close to heaven as anyone can get in the world since the bombs fell. Yet that achievement also means that it falls upon us not only to avoid backsliding into barbarism, but to refine our societal structures and create a culture that we can truly make into a world that is as close to heaven as one can get on this earth. I am ashamed to tell you, my fellow singers, Connies, Youpers, Kicks, and Socks, that in Argan Eden, there are a few snakes. Let's begin with the Patriots and their ilk. We know they are here. We know they are listening. They have the sense now to lurk in the shadows of our republic rather than march out in the bright light of day like they once did. They now only come out at night with their black masks and hats to assault and lynch anyone that looks like they have Sino ancestry. Anti-Sinoism is alive and well, still 2 centuries past the Great War. What can we say? Hate like a vampire never dies. And like a vampire, hate sucks out the lifeblood of a community. It breeds distrust and anger, resentment and suspicion. Once a few people have been its victims, the air changes, and the bigots have what they want. All human societies have struggled with in-groups and out-groups, and the Patriots are determined that they, and they alone, should be the ones that determine who the members of the in-group that belongs to the tribe will be. Now, those of you who are not Connies may not be able to relate. You may have noticed that most Connies have a certain look. A dark look, if you take my meaning. After the bombs fell, people were looking for others to blame for the horrors of the world. It began with the Americans and the Canadians that happened to have Chinese ancestry. Many were beaten to death or chopped apart, blamed as being infiltrators or collaborators of the war. It spread quickly. Japanese people were next, then Koreans, then those who were Hmong or from Vietnam. I've seen holotapes of Sino women forced to do things to please their attackers, only to be shot in the head. The population of those that had Asian heritage began drifting out of the urban areas and into the wilds, where risking a swarm of blood bugs was easier than risking being around your fellow human beings. The Patriot movement came out about this time. They promised a myth of security once the Sino threat was abolished. But when the security did not come to pass, they had to pick another minority, another scapegoat. And they picked my own. They turned their backs and their knives on black people. This is sadly nothing new in the black experience in the Americas. Now, my ancestors were part of the first exodus into Connieland. We were driven out of our homes in Detroit by the machines, and then out of the Lower Peninsula by roving bands of patriots who were convinced that we were not northerner enough. This was before the Gander identity really took hold. So for most of you, I know this is going to sound like ancient history. But for those of us who suffered it, it's like we are our ancestors. For us, it's very real. And the thing about history is that it's a seed. And at times, it blooms again when you're least expecting it. Black folks, Asian folks, and others that didn't quite fit the Patriot mold, be they peaceniks or anyone else liberal, were cast out. Onto the open trails of Connieland, we found a home. And once the very places that had driven us out began to depend upon us for a trade in meat stock, well, ain't it funny how having money can solve most problems? The Patriots finally began to be suppressed when the GNR realized that they were bad for business and staying fed. Measures were passed and the grossest offenders were given some light sentences, but I do have to point out that none of them were ever hung or tortured as their victims were. It hardly seems right, and I for one think there is something to be said for the adage of an eye for an eye. But I'm religious. Oh, not that Nova Pax Unity Christian kind of religious. I mean more fire and brimstone falling from the sky on the unjust religious. Zeus casting his lightning, Jehovah raging in a storm kind of religious, and like a prophet, I am no longer welcome, I feel, in my home country. Which brings us back to the Patriots. There was a time I didn't know any Patriots, and there was a time after I met some. Almost 5 years ago, I was working a Brahmin trail with my pa, going into Lansing. We awoke one night to the sound of gunfire and someone stealing our cattle. My mother, whose ancestors were Chinese, was being shot repeatedly by these men in black masks and hats. My father tried to stop them and managed to even kill one with his rifle, but the other shot him full of holes as well. I remember hiding as best I could that night. There was nowhere else to hide but underneath the bellies of the Brahmin. I crawled along under old Bess's belly trying to get to the side of a pen, hoping I could escape into the wasteland. And I remember thinking I was almost free as the edge of the pen came into sight. And then they grabbed me. These patriots had some vestige of morality left. They couldn't bring themselves to kill a girl as young as I was. So they improvised. They come up with a test to prove God's will. They let the herd walk over my back and my legs. And if I could crawl my way to a medical doctor, then I had spunk enough to be saved. Now I wish my encounter with them was a fluke, but it is not. There has been a study of underreported trend of incidents of patriots attacking minorities. The majority of these attacks are upon, as you would imagine, those of us that look like we have Asian ancestry. But there are a few notable examples. In the year 2085, a group of patriots attempted to attack settlements in what we now call the Sacred Hoop Republic. They were beaten back, but not before almost 100 of the Neo-Sioux had been slaughtered. In 2186, downtown Lansing suffered a riot that has gone underreported or unreported in official channels. It was a riot where almost 35 black men and women were lynched alongside another 40 to 45 Sinos. Since reports state that members of the Lansing Reserve Police forces may have been involved, including the son of the then mayor, it is no wonder that this event has not been officially recorded. And recently, in 2293, a roaming band of patriots terrorized the Brahmin trails, often killing people in their sleep and simply slaughtering the Brahmin. Now often when we hear our loved ones say something that makes us uncomfortable, such as, "You can't trust them Chinese folk," we do nothing to correct them because it is unpleasant. But we must as a society. Had we done so earlier, perhaps my parents would have lived longer, and my back now not be rendered useless. The patriots also have a hatred for all mutants. And I understand the fear. Yes, there are mutants who have extreme mutations that make them dangerous or mentally unstable. But the Patriot movement paints all mutants as being dangerous. I do not just mean super mutants, ghouls, and the elves that are their targets. In 2287, a girl was strung up for having purple irises. In 2289, a pair of twins were burned to death because their mutation gave them an extra arm. Much like the forefathers, the Patriots believe that they are the sole judge of who is and who is not human enough. And that brings me to the plight of ghouls in the Republic. It is a matter of public health and record that ghouls must register within the Republic. Many small towns outright refuse to allow ghouls to reside within their borders, and it wasn't until 2256 that the Republic allowed ghouls to reside in major urban areas so long as they were registered and could prove they were receiving treatments. Yes, there are biological concerns about ghouls living amongst non-ghouls, but they are preventable, and we should be extending ghouls the same concern we would extend to anyone else who suffers from a disease. Further, the knowledge and skill that a long-lived ghoul can provide are invaluable to our communities as we rebuild the world. And yes, there is a concern with mental stability once someone has contracted ghoulism. I am perfectly aware of the adage that all ghouls eventually go feral, but frankly, I do not believe it to be true. I have met and listened to the accounts of many pre-war ghouls that are still sane. Most of our ghouls that reside alongside us will die just like any other gander can expect to, by violence or by a disease, and there are some diseases that still affect them. In the post-apocalypse, don't we need every friendly hand in mind that we can muster? Not according to the Patriots. But though I am not a scholar, I have read enough history to know what happens, to know which empires endure longer than others and which decline, and why. Rome survived for as long as it did because it allowed others to absorb its government and largely run their own lives on their own. So long as the taxes were paid and the people would respond to the call of arms, Rome was, in the view of history, a fairly benign and ruling empire, especially compared to, say, the Nazis, Stalin, the Khmer Rouge, Castro. Governments and societies that cut themselves off from others, and further evolution culturally and naturally, are destined to limit their size, their resources, and ultimately their lifespan as a nation. They will either be absorbed forever a second-class citizen in the domain of others, such as what happened to the Native Americans in the Old West, or they will be thrown into the scrap pile of history. I have no idea what history will say about us, the Lansing Republic, in its grander wrap. But I wear my grand green rag proudly, and hope that someday in the future she will be a state flag flying once more under the old red, white, and blue. Well, I've preached at you long enough, brothers and sisters. It's time for a little James Brown and his motivational track, Get Up Off of That Thing.